In this video, we're going to be looking at building a real-time PowerShell Universal Dashboard for Microsoft Flight Simulator using Python and SimConnect. So recently, Microsoft Flight Simulator, the 2020 edition, was released, and I found myself spending quite a bit of time with it. Personally, with being stuck in this year, 2020, being stuck in, not being able to go a lot of places, it's been kind of nice to, play a simulator that kind of lets you get a little bit of that travel feeling. So while I've been spending time in that, I've noticed in the community that there's been a number of third-party tools and utilities and dashboards and things like that, which were pretty cool. So I wanted to take the opportunity to basically build one with PowerShell Universal Dashboard. And I found that this was actually pretty easy to put together. So I figured, this is a good use case for PowerShell Universal Dashboard. It was pretty fun to build. And let's go ahead and step into it. Now, the primary component that we're going to see on the front end here in the demo coming up is Universal Dashboard. So Universal Dashboard, you can build web pages with PowerShell without HTML or JavaScript. And what I wanted to do is display various stats about the aircraft, such as the speed or the altitude or the heading of the aircraft. And I also wanted to build some light tooling to control functions of the aircraft, like the autopilot and some of the basic control functionality. I found that, using my existing Universal Dashboard skills, I was able to build this pretty quickly. And I even learned some of the new features of Universal Dashboard along the way. Because Universal Dashboard is being continuously updated, I actually wanted to get up to speed with a couple of the new controls, such as dynamic sections. Now, in order to facilitate this integration, I did have to pull in a few other components. So Microsoft Flight Simulator itself uses a SimConnect DLL, which apparently has been around for many, many years and is used for many different simulators, but basically allows third parties to connect to the sim itself and get functions and execute methods and things like that with the sim. Now, while this DLL is out there and while it is entirely possible to load the DLL and interact with the DLL directly with PowerShell, that was a little bit more of a task than I wanted to take on at the moment. So in the meantime, I'm actually using Python to do that interconnect because there's a GitHub project out there called Python SimConnect, which basically loads up that DLL and has a very, very simple Python-based interface for calling into the simulator, reading variables, setting variables, again, triggering all the components that we can access in the sim using Python. It's actually pretty powerful. There are, I think, over 800 variables that come out of the box in SimConnect, and there's probably even more functions available that you can use to pretty much get anything about, basically access anything in the sim using this. And when you put Python SimConnect on top of it, it makes it very, very easy. Another nice thing about Python SimConnect is it actually includes an example project called Cockpit Companion. And this actually throws a Python Flask server on top of Python SimConnect that exposes all of those variables, all of those methods available in the simulator on a REST API. It also has a nice dashboard, so you can do some of the same controls, but we're not going to be using the Cockpit Companion dashboard. In this example, we're going to be using Universal Dashboard. So with this, I can expose basically everything that's happening in my simulator onto a REST API. And then, as you can imagine, that makes it very easy to call that REST API with PowerShell in Universal Dashboard. Let's take a step back here and map out what this process actually looks like. So I have the simulator itself running, and it is using that SimConnect DLL to access the simulator and all the variables and all the functions and all that. Now, in my case, we're using the Python SimConnect package, and we're using the Cockpit Companion so that I expose all of that SimConnect functionality over a REST API. Once that's all up and running, I can build a dashboard in PowerShell Universal Dashboard. And with simple invoke web requests, I can call in and pull the data I need with a simple REST GET request. Likewise, if I need to tell the simulator to do something, I can push data into it with a POST or a PUT request. If I've ever used PowerShell to call an API or execute a webhook or something like that, I'll be right at home knowing how to do this. So I was able to put together something pretty quickly in order to build my dashboard. So let's just go ahead and jump into a demo and see what this looks like. Okay, so now we've loaded up the simulation and we also have Universal Dashboard running as well with all of our components hooked up and running. So in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, the Idaho backcountry is one of my favorite areas to fly. There's a lot of these little grass strips, and it's pretty entertaining. So currently we've got the sim loaded up and we're reading values as well. If we zoom out on the Universal Dashboard map here a little bit, I can see my position. It's actually kind of nice because I can see positions of other little strips like these here, these little boxes. And I can again see all the basic information here, some of the basic information about my aircraft. So it's a nice little tool to use while actually playing around in the sim. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to start up this little flight and we're just going to go ahead and get started. Now let's pay particular attention to the fact that as I actually take off here, we should see a number of these values updating. Specifically, the vertical speed and the airspeed should change quite a bit. All right, so as we get up in the air here, we can see our airspeed is updating, our altitude has changed a little bit, and specifically our vertical speed has changed quite a bit as we're actually climbing now. Now, currently I don't have my map on a very aggressive reset either, but that will update as we go. So I think what we'll do is we'll just fly around for a little bit here, we'll touch down somewhere, and then we'll move into testing some of our autopilot controls. Okay, so now that we've wrapped up this flight, let's do something a little bit different. All right, so in order to test our autopilot functionality, we're just going to quickly take off out of Gimhe real quick here, and we have a more complex aircraft, but that being said, we still should be able to use some of the functionality of the Universal Dashboard here that we've built to control the autopilot on this aircraft. Alright, so now that we are up over Korea, heading south out in the Pacific, what we're going to begin to do is actually try and use some of our autopilot control functionality. So while many of the aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 have a variety of different aircraft autopilot controls, generally speaking, I found that most of them have a few simple pieces of functionality. And we're not playing with the real simulator here by any means. We're just having some fun pressing buttons and things like that. But generally speaking, the most simple methods that we have for autopilot are heading mode and vertical speed mode. These are just the two that I tend to use the most in the sim. So what we're going to do is turn on the autopilot, which is done in the sim by actually pressing the autopilot button, but I'm going to do it here in my dashboard. And once I've done that, I'm then going to turn on my heading autopilot, which will keep my aircraft heading in a particular direction. So we'll turn on the autopilot master. We should see this light here flip on, and then we're going to turn on heading mode as well. And I can see the heading mode has turned on. So now that I have the autopilot on here, I have completely released my hands from the controls, and now I can just go about my day here. Now that I'm not trying to steer the aircraft here and watch a map and click buttons, this makes it a little bit easier. If I zoom out on the map here, we can see we've left our airport and we're on our route over here to Japan. I do like actually using some of the dashboards available from OpenStreetMaps over some of the things that you actually have in the flight simulator itself. This particular is a OpenStreetMap data set, and it's a lot better. It's much easier to explore and kind of see what you're flying over than what you actually have in the sim. So again, this is a extremely simple example of some of the things you can do with Universal Dashboard and with the Microsoft Flight Simulator itself. But it's a pretty fun example, and it's actually pretty useful to use this in real time when you're playing the actual simulator. So for me, again, I just kind of wanted to get familiar with some of the newer Universal Dashboard components, and what better way than to build a little dashboard that is fun to use with a flight sim. So thanks everybody for watching. I'll include some links to the dashboard components, the various components I use to build the dashboard and the integration. And I'll also include the actual Universal Dashboard PowerShell script we use to put this all together as well.